Well, hey guys, glad to be with you here tonight. It's a little bit different. I'm not there in person because I've got something going on here at work that's going to keep me away from you guys. But on the bright side, you can have a fancy tour of my room. This is my bedroom, as awesome as it is. Got the important things: a mountain bike, backpack, and also my Christmas decorations up because I'm prepared for Christmas. But also, they're from the last year. I haven't taken them down yet. And that way, if you keep them up, eventually they come back in style. So those are my Christmas decorations behind me and whatnot. But I'm glad to be with you guys here tonight. For those of you who are new, usually I'm there in person. This week I'm off and at school working, and we'll be hopefully back with you guys shortly. Anyway, I'm glad that you have come and check us out, and I believe the Lord led you here tonight, has designed which group you're going to be in, and I'm certain that you're just going to be strengthened, encouraged, and grown tonight in ways that you weren't even necessarily expecting, but God has definitely got his hand on the meeting tonight and you being here. So thanks for coming and checking us out. And do know that each one of you has been prayed for. We continue to lift you guys up individually in prayer. So if you're joining us, again, last week we talked about, we're in the SBC's series on Love One, One Love. And last week we talked about how the church is supposed to really be a place where we come in, we experience God's love for ourselves, but then the church is the active body of God who reaches out and loves. And so it's kind of like the church is to be this refueling station of love, that we come in, we get fueled up, and then we go out and we pour out love, and how attractive that is, and why that it's such a radical departure than what we typically think of church, but I think it's probably what Jesus envisioned for his church. So that was last week, and now this week we're going to shift into quite the opposite, but along the same line, and we're going to be talking about eternity. And so the passage that we only are going to be looking at one passage that was preached on over the weekend, and that's Ecclesiastes 3:11. So if you have your own Bible, go ahead and you can open up to Ecclesiastes 3:11. I'll be reading out the ESV version. It's also on your handout in front of you as well. But yeah, we're going to be talking about eternity. There's two main points with it. We're going to spend half the night on the first point, and then we'll shift over to the second point and ask you to make a choice at the end of the night. And again, the hope is that you're encouraged and yet challenged at the same time. So if you had a moment, you can go ahead. Again, we're looking at Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. And in the ESV, it says this. He, and it's speaking about God, so God has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into every man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to the end. Now, frankly, I read that like 5 or 6 times, and I was still a little bit confused, especially on that second part. So one of the things I like to do is jump over to my NLT version or different versions to see about it. And here's how it reads out of the NLT version, which really helped me understand that second part, which it says, God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. And all of a sudden, I read it in that version and went, oh, that makes sense. So in the ESV, what it's saying is, we cannot understand all that God has planned for us, even though he has put eternity in our heart. Basically, we're still limited because we live in reality. And I went, oh, that makes more sense. So that's why I try to read out a few different versions just to help me understand some of the tougher passages. But there were 2 main points that were preached on the weekend, and the first one was that eternity is real and our hearts know it. Basically, that eternity is a reality and that intrinsically our hearts know it. And then the second point is that eternity is not a unilateral reality, that a choice must be made. Essentially, with that, it's saying that eternity, that where you spend eternity will depend upon your choices. And so you must make a choice. It's not going to be, eternity is not going to be the same for everybody. So choices must be made. But we're going to jump on the first point. Eternity is real and our hearts know it. And before we jump too far into it, I was thinking about statistics, probably because I was teaching math again, but you know, most of the statistics are made up or can be manipulated. You know, 5 out of 4 people are really good at statistics, and one of you got that, and I was giggling, the rest of you, never mind. But essentially, here's a statistic that is pretty true to life, and that is 1 out of every 1 people will die. or do die. Now, sure, there were two people in the Old Testament that were taken up into heaven, and there'll be those of us who, when the parousia happens, that will be taken directly up into heaven. But for the most part, one out of one people, we end up perishing. We end up dying. We don't know when we're going to die, and we don't know if we're going to be prepared for it, but the reality is, like it or not, we are going to die. And as we just sit there and we dwell on that thought, once we die, we enter into this eternity. Is that hopeful or is that dreadful? What strikes your heart when you hear those words? Because honestly, we're a culture that hates to think about death. We try to just push death aside because it's such a stark reality. Our whole goal is to prolong our lives as much as possible. Can you say Botox? There's some, don't go on to Botox, but aging is seen as like the arch nemesis of life, because as we age, we're reminded that we're getting closer to our destiny or our end. And so we push it aside. And for many of you know that, death is such a jarring reality. Like, we're going through life, we're chucking every day, and it's moving and going and moving and going. And then we get that phone call. And many of you have probably received a phone call like that, and I know I have. And all of a sudden I get that phone call. And so it's just, so-and-so died today. And it's like this whole wheel that we've been running and running and running, it just slams shut. It just stops. And our whole world just pauses as we're reminded how frail human lives are. And it just shakes us to the core. And so we deal with it, and we deal with those emotions, but then we quickly put it aside and try to ignore it again. But the reality is, death is a function of life. And if we don't think about it, I believe we miss out on the fullness of life. In fact, the less we think about death, the more we're apt to miss out on life. And I get that. That's a radical claim. So let me give you a quick example to explain this. I don't know if any of you watched the TV show Arrow, I was just watching it, and the new season started, so that's where this analogy is coming from. So imagine I put you in a room, right? And you're in a room, and I give you one bow and one arrow, and then all around the room I put tons of targets up, and I say, go ahead and shoot at any one of the targets, but make sure you hit the most important target. So you're going to look around, you've got 30 choices to make, and you're going to try to decide which target to shoot at, and you want to shoot at the most important one. The problem is, if they all look the same, how would you know? You wouldn't. Eventually, you would just have to randomly take a choice, and you would just hope that you hit the most important target. And see, I think that's what life is a lot about. Because many people, and I'm not talking about outside the church, I'm talking about inside the church, I'm talking about you and me, we go through this life with no aim in our life. We go and we just keep going, and we go to work, it's just that everything keeps going, but we have no aim. Because we don't realize that our lives are short, they're but a breath. And fullness of life comes when we realize that our lives are finite, and they're going to be ending very soon. Any of us who have faced death, where we've had cancer, or we've been with our family members and we knew their time was short, it makes us just appreciate and value life that much more. We take every moment for granted, every person for granted, every sensation, and we just start living life to the fullest because in those moments we realize how frail life is. And so when we face death, or when we think about the fact that our lives will end at some time, it causes us to reorient our whole lives around what actually is important. For me personally, how I do this is I try to write out my eulogy every few years, like what I want people to say at my funeral. And if you come over to my house, which you're kind of at my house, but if you came over to my house, you would see that I have a little tombstone on my mirror every morning that I look, and I wake up, and it constantly reminds me that I'm going to die, and it's got my life vision and my life purpose on it. Because when I think about the reality that I'm going to die someday, it gives me motivation to live fully in the present. So I'm going to pause, and I want you to actually kind of concentrate and think about in this next question is, what do you want on your tombstone? Pepperoni and sausage, if you are familiar with the 90s commercials. But essentially pause and as a group discuss, like, what is the aim of your life? What is your purpose? What are you going for? What are you shooting for? What do you want to be said at the end of your life about you? So go ahead, discuss that as a group, and then once we come back, we're going to dig into that passage a little bit more and see how God has wired us for eternity. All right, I hope that you were actually encouraged and challenged with those small group discussions, and that it maybe made you think about, where is my life orientated towards, and what is that going to, how am I going to change my life for that? But let's turn over that passage which we looked at in church, which is not Ephesians, Ecclesiastes 3:11. Again, it's on your handout, but you'll notice there it says that he, or speaking about that, God, has placed eternity into man's heart. So God has intentionally taken for every human being and placed eternity into our heart. And eternity just simply means, I looked it up in the Hebrew, it just simply means an unending or infinite time. But he's placed it within our heart. Now that's not the four-ventricle thing. What it is it's our innermost being. It's our soul. It's where our emotions come from. It's where our will. It's like everything that's within us, the deepest desires, is where God places eternity, the desire for eternity. You see, God has placed the desire for eternity deep within every single human. There is a desire for eternity. And if you're like one of my freshmen or all my kids I teach, they're always asking me, why? Why did God put a desire for eternity in everybody's heart? And my belief on this is that it's because God's desire for all of humanity has always been eternity. That was a little bit fast, but again, God's desire for humanity has always been eternity. Now, where am I pulling that from? Pulling it from Genesis and Revelation. If you ever get a chance, I'd highly recommend read Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelations 21 and 22. So the first two chapters of the Bible, the last two chapters. And just look for parallels. It is an amazing parallels about the first garden and the new garden. The first time God dwelled with people, and the last time forever God dwelled with people. But see, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, and God intended the Garden of Eden to be an eternal dwelling place of man. It was there that God walked and dwelled with Adam and Eve in perfect harmony. And it was only after the fall that God had to cast them out of the garden. If you read in Genesis 3:22, it says, we must send them out of the garden because otherwise they will take from the tree of life and they will live forever. See, Garden of Eden was established, and it could have been in forever had the fall not happened. But then we jump all the way to the end of the book, in the Bible, we end up in Revelation, and where it shows that God's plan is full restoration. Jesus has returned, all the world's problems have been resolved, it's perfect harmony, and God once again dwells with humanity. And there in Revelations 21:3 it says, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. Where God is going to be with them for eternity. And so salvation, the Christian life, is actually an invitation into this meta-narrative of eternity. Or meta-narrative is just a fancy word for big story of eternity. Since the Garden of Eden, God's plan for all humanity has been eternity. That they would come into relationship, and then they would, once they enter into that relationship, they would stay with him in relationship for all of eternity. So when you got saved, you actually took a step onto this story of eternity that goes from beginning and goes forever. And so why do people have this yearning for more in their life? Why do they want to be significant? Why do I want to be significant? Why do you want to be significant? Because we were created for eternity. Because eternity has been placed in our hearts, and eternity is a real reality. And our hearts intrinsically know that it is real. And so we were designed for way more than this temporal life. We were created for eternity. Now let me throw one more idea at you, and this ties in with the last part as well. You know, you may have heard the phrase, someone's so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. But if you've heard that phrase, I think it's actually wrong. It's close, but it's wrong. Because we're called to be so heavenly minded that we become earthly good. See, the difference is one says you're no earthly good, but one says if you become so heavenly minded, you become earthly good. The more we focus on eternity, the soon coming reality, the more we're going to work and strive to make this present reality good and better. I found an interesting quote. I did not read the whole book of Mere Christianity because I just try not to read too many books. I'm overwhelmed as it is. But so I went online, was searching around, and C.S. Lewis says this amazing quote that I had put on the handout in front of you. And let me read it for you and read with me on this. But C.S. Lewis says, a continual, that's ongoing, looking forward to the eternal world is not a form of escapism or wishful thinking, but it is one of the things a Christian is meant to do. If you read history, you will find that the Christians who did the most for the present world were just those who thought the most of the next. It is since Christians today have largely ceased to think about the other world that they have become so effective at changing this reality. Did you catch that? C.S. Lewis said it really well. We were made not only for eternity, but made to dwell and think about eternity. And the more we dwell, and those people who have changed history, radically changed history, given their life for the gospel, are typically those who are most concentrating on eternity and the heaven there to come. Paul, the Apostle Paul, echoes this in 2 Corinthians, where he says, look not on the things that are seen, but look on the things that are unseen. For the things that we see in this present are going to pass away, but the things that we do not see are eternal and will last forever. You see, eternity is real, and our hearts know that it's real. So we're not only supposed to think about it, but we're supposed to experience it and look forward to eternity. So we're supposed to take this, at salvation, take a step onto this eternal plan of God, where we enter into the eternal plan and then we're going to dwell with God for eternity. And as we dwell on that, it makes us more effective and work harder in the present. So I would challenge you to begin to think more about eternity. Now we're going to pause and bring up into groups. Again, there's two questions in front of you to discuss as groups. And once we come back in, we're going to shift over to that second point, that eternity is not a unilateral reality. All right, so one of the things, I'm hoping that you're challenged to start seeing life in a different manner, that eternity is an important thing to be thinking about on a frequent basis. And so we're going to shift gears and switch over to that second point, that eternity is not a unilateral reality, that a choice must be made. Now you see, eternity is a foregone conclusion. Every single human who has been created is going to live forever. Every single human will live forever. So in that sense, it's a unilateral reality. But where it's different is, the question is, where are we going to spend eternity? See, there are a number of passages that say for those who follow the Lord, we will dwell with God in heaven, in a place of no more pain, sorrow, and it will be fullness of joy and love. But Matthew 25 shows us a stark picture to that. And this is a hard news that comes with Christianity that actually causes a number of people to walk away from Christianity when they hear this. But it is a hard news. And so if you have a Bible, you can open to Matthew 25. That's what we're going to be looking at in just a second. Matthew 25 says the second half of eternity. One is full of blissfulness in heaven and more than we can think or imagine. But let's look at what Jesus says in Matthew 25 for the other reality, or the other option. Picking up in verse 30, so Jesus is telling stories about his second coming, and then one of them, he says in verse 30, the worthless servant, or the wicked servant, will be cast out into the outer darkness, and in that place there will be eternal weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then he continues on to speak again of his second coming. And this is where, again, he speaks of the realities of eternity. Verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And before him will be gathered all the nations. And Jesus will separate people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goat. Verse 33, and he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And verse 41, then we're going to sort of skip a little bit down to verse 41. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed and wicked people, into the eternal fire that was originally prepared for the devil and his angels. And these wicked people will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. Now Jesus, in this passage, is pretty clear that it's not a temporary punishment, but it's eternal punishment. And it's not just a New Testament concept, it's throughout the Old Testament as well. I think of Isaiah 66:24, which talks about that when people die, there will be a place where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched and their bodies will burn forever. Again, it's a horrific picture, but I just want to say that this isn't just the New Testament, it's throughout Scriptures. And this place of eternity. You see, eternity is a foregone conclusion, but the reality of where we will go is not. And I'm not going to lie, this idea of eternal torment is not my favorite topic. And it's not only that, it's a hard truth. Frankly, I wish I could pick up what the Mormons believe. And the Mormons believe that everybody goes to heaven. There's 3 tiers of heaven, and if you're a Mormon, you get to the top tier. If you're a good person, you get to the 2nd tier. And if you're an evil person, you get to the 3rd tier of heaven. Everybody gets to heaven. And there is a hell, but the hell is only for the devil and his angels. That is attractive. Unfortunately, it's not biblical. I mean, even though this is a hard truth, it's what the Scriptures are teaching us. And so individually, we have to wrestle with that reality. And individually, each of us has to make a choice to follow the Lord. And that choice will determine where our eternity is. There's the first-time commitment, which is what we would call salvation. But there's the harder thing called a lifestyle of commitments, where it's every single day we get up and we commit our lives to the Lord. And so the pastor got up, and I'll ask him the same 3 things for us. He said there are 3 people, 3 different types of individuals that are sitting here in our group tonight and are in the church and are in the world. And as I go through them, I want you to be challenged and to ask, which of the 3 are you? So the first one are those of us who have made a commitment to follow Christ at some point. We initially entered into the eternal story of God, and we are continuing in that commitment with wholehearted abandonment. That doesn't mean we don't sin, that doesn't mean we screw up. It just means that every day we continue to commit our lives to the Lord in whatever He would call us to. Now, if you're in that camp, I want to give you a little bit of encouragement. Even if you've fallen this week, or sin keeps popping up, you keep falling down, there's a button I call the reset button, and I hit it every night, and every morning I hit it again. And it says His mercies are new every day. So if you've fallen or you've had a hard time, I want to encourage you, it doesn't nullify your commitment. Get up, set the reset button, say, Jesus, forgive me, help me, give me grace. I'm going to be committed to you today. And then you go on for that day. So if you're in that camp, awesome. Thank you. You're amazing. The second camp, it's a pretty clear camp, and that's those of us who have been around the church for a long time. Maybe we go to church, maybe we hang out in the church, but we've actually never made a personal commitment to the Lord to follow Him for our lives. We've never actually made that day, taken that time to say, I am fully committing my life. And I'm not just talking about a sinner's prayer. A lot of people pray the sinner's prayer, but they actually never make a commitment. This is asking the Lord into your life and making a commitment to give your whole life to Him. Have you ever done that? And so that would be the second group, of those who have never even made that commitment. But what I find is most of us are in this third category. And that is, At some point, we're straying Christians. At some point, we made a commitment to the Lord. We said, I am yours. My life was changed. But since then, we've drawn back. We've pulled away from the Lord. We basically are living with a half-hearted commitment to the Lord. We haven't really decided if it's worth it anymore, or it got hard, or life didn't work the way we went, and so we've drawn back on our commitments. And basically, at best, we're half-hearted committed to the Lord. In fact, if the Lord it wasn't involved in my life, there would be no change or no difference. So those are your three options, which is, are you fully committed to the Lord today? Have you never made a commitment to the Lord? Or are you half-hearted commitment? And if you're in those last two, you need to make a decision. And today may be that day that you need to make the decision. Maybe it's tomorrow, but at some point you need to make a decision. You need to make a decision. Are you going to commit your life to the Lord? To love Him and serve Him in good time, in bad, in sickness, and in health. Gosh, that sounds like a marriage commitment, because it is. It's a lifelong, eternal commitment. See, eternity is a certain reality. We are all going to spend eternity, but it's not a unilateral reality. A choice. Our individual choice must be made. And so tonight, I'm going to challenge you and ask you this one question. Have you entered into the grand story, the eternal story of God, by committing your life to the Lord? Did you do it once, and are you doing it every single day? Are you making that commitment every single day? Through the good, through the bad. So where do you find yourself in those three categories? And I'm going to turn it over in the small groups in just a second, but before I do, as you share in your small groups where you're at in that commitment, I don't want this to be a time of trying to get someone saved or getting them like hammering with all sorts of scriptures and getting them. There is a time for that, but tonight I would rather have you share your stories, your successes, your struggles, and be honest where you're at. Because I'm certain there are other people in that group that are where you're at, and maybe you just need to hear someone else's story to encourage you in making that choice. A lot of us know the theology already. What we need to hear is the real life stories of where we're all at. And it is a challenging topic tonight, and I understand that, and I thank you for sticking with us. So I'm going to turn you over to the last two questions to discuss. Again, the first one is personally wrestling. Have you entered into that grand story, the eternal story of God for your own life? And what does that look like? And if you finish that before time's up, then I would ask you, have you started talking with others, or that one person that we're supposed to love? How can you encourage them to enter into that grand story too? So thanks, guys. I look forward to connecting with you soon. And again, I'll be praying for you guys. Look forward to talking.